I'm Frits Pannekoek. I've been in the heritage business for over 42 years by my last calculation. I started my career out with Parks Canada as the head of research for the Prairie region. And that's where we found the first time that there were very, very few trades available. In fact, Parks Canada had its own trades unit because there was nobody in the private sector. So that became really a major issue in the preservation business. After being with Parks Canada, I then joined as director of the Historic Sites and Archives Service for the province of Alberta. At the time I joined, which I think was somewhere around 79, there were 50,000 buildings built before 1945 in the province of Alberta. They were disappearing at the rate of 5,000 per year. And by my calculation, I wouldn't make it till retirement. So it was really clear that we had to start preserving those buildings. And we did stop, obviously, the loss. But the real problem, again, in Alberta was lack of trades.
So I'm Ian, I'm an engineer, and I like making stuff. And the reason I like that is because my mom could make anything. And she was they called it an occupational therapist at the Belcher. So when people got back from the war, they were, pretty blown up. And so she taught them how to do stuff just to get them rehabilitated. So she could do anything. And so in my life, we were always making stuff. Spent my whole life doing that. I'm an engineer. I went to school. I was going to go to grad school and be some kind of university professor or something. And I was there one day, and two guys came into the office there, and they were looking for somebody to build a machine. And so I listened to them for a while, and I thought, Christ, I could do that. So I went over and said to them, how much you want to pay? And they told me how much, and I didn't know anything about the price, so it sounded like a lot of money. It was $5,000, and I was making $300 a month then. So I thought, oh, I can do that for $5,000. So I started doing it. It was a prototype check writing machine. It's on the left-hand side of that desk there. Yeah. So that's how I got started. My dad loaned me all the money he had in the world, $2,500, and I went and rented a double garage and bought a lathe and a milling machine and started making stuff. So I've been doing that for my whole life, and I've had a wonderful time doing it. And it's just as much fun as you can have in your life.
Well, I grew up in the brick industry. I'm a fourth generation brick maker. Throughout those generations, our company made all the different types of brick, and I've been working for our brickmaking company since 1980. And although we make mostly new brick, I've also been quite involved in the Historical Society, and most recently for 10 years with our Heritage Resources Committee for the City of Medicine Hat, during which time we designated quite a few municipal heritage resources, municipal historic resources. And so as part of that committee work, I was exposed to the standards and guidelines for the conservation of buildings in Canada, Parks Canada stuff, and some of the theory behind conservation. And then most recently, I restored a 100-year-old grocery building here in Medicine Hat, right from the bare studs on up. So faced a lot of the challenges that many building developers trying to restore heritage buildings face. So I got quite a varied experience, and to boot, I'm an amateur bricklayer.
If you can teach an owner how to maintain his house without like going to Home Depot and maybe doing something really nasty to their place, then they can protect it, then they can work with it and maintain it. Because it doesn't matter if your house is a year old or 1,000 years old, it needs to be maintained regularly.
My name is Darryl Cariou. I've been involved in heritage conservation for over 35 years. I started off in the trades, not in the conservation trades, but in the trades. I'm currently the manager of the City of Calgary's historic building program, and I spent the bulk of my career in heritage conservation planning.
I really believe that these things, you're part of a continuum. So when you start, you know, most of us, our careers started back in 1750 when people started thinking about the Industrial Revolution and moving home craft-based industries into some kind of more organized place. And we became really expert. Some of us really became expert in doing different things. And so every person that has learned how to do this with great skill has a tremendous repository of knowledge. And, you know, we're losing that knowledge, and we shouldn't, because it's valuable to somebody someplace, and we can't lose it. And so that's why I think it's important to preserve it. And then, you know, the other thing that happens with this stuff is we got a heritage building. We go in and we do stuff to it, which is sort of like, you know, it's not the way it was built. It's not the way it was. I'm trying to preserve the thin veneer of a heritage building. I think people don't get, if you don't do this stuff right, if you don't look after it right, then what happens is it's just a target for later. You haven't really protected it, what you've done, and you've lost a history when you don't protect it.
Buildings are an important link to our past. In Alberta here, we're a relatively young society. And I say that with all due deference to our Indigenous citizens that have been here for thousands of years, but the built environment is just over a century old in most cases, and really links us back to the early settlement period. But old buildings do require maintenance, so that maintenance needs to use the same materials and techniques if you follow the standards and guidelines for conservation of buildings or Parks Canada techniques. And really, that knowledge, you find it in tradesmen that are probably on the point of retirement, because they cross over back to a period when a lot of those techniques were still, if not widely used, were still used to some extent. And I'm talking plasterers, masons, carpenters, painters.
They understand how they were made. They understand what's inherently important in their structure. They understand that they're breathable and the materials they used. And then they understand, you know, how the trades actually work to build them. So they have this really amazing knowledge.
That's a big question. Preserving heritage trades, maintaining heritage trades are important because we need people to work on these heritage buildings. But I think to go into that a little deeper, the heritage trades are part of the intangible heritage and part of the value that's intrinsic to these historic resources. So I think when you're preserving these historic resources, we should be talking more explicitly about preserving the heritage trades that are part of the conservation. It's one big package. I think that's why it's important, because it's integral to the big picture of what we're trying to do.
Building trades also help preserve cultures of people. And I emphasize the preservation of culture as well, because Indigenous trades matter a lot. How do you put up a teepee? How do you do it well? How do you brain tan hides? How do you gather the right kind of hides in the right place? What are the ceremonies involved? Because we think that Indigenous building trades are ceremonial in nature. But if you look carefully at non-Indigenous, there's a lot of ceremony, unwritten, involved in building trades of all kinds. So it's the preservation of culture. So again, we got to preserve those buildings, we got to preserve culture, and we've got to preserve best practice and craftsmanship.
Well, that's an easy answer. No, and I think that's the answer you'll get across the country. This has been an issue, and explicit issue in the field for a long time. I know that the province and the university and the city got together, might have been 5 years ago, to talk about the lack of skills in the heritage conservation world. The focus was on the consulting world then, not so much the trades. There was some discussion of trades. There was certainly awareness of the shortage of trades. So no question, there's a shortage of skilled heritage trades, full stop.
No, I think, when you look at the stuff that's done, when people don't know what to do, then they just come and get somebody else that's never done it before to do it. And so when you look at those buildings after they're done, the memory of how it was done and why it was done and who did it and what tools they used to do it, all those things are lost. What I think is that we can do that so much better, but the people are really severely rationed that are able to do this. And really what they should be doing is not doing it, they should be showing somebody else how to do it. And the thing that's happening in our society now is there's a whole bunch of people that look like me, and many of them are retiring, and they're trying to figure out what they do next. So half of our productive capacity is in that age group now, and a quarter of them want to make some. Yeah. So I think the skilled people should be teaching those people how to do it, and it would be better for society if we did.
I certainly agree with you about the more places being designated. In Medicine Hat in the 10 years, we designated a dozen municipal historic resources. We didn't have any before. So there is an increasing demand. And when it comes to sourcing people to handle the different challenges, it varies quite a bit by trade, I would say. So there are individuals out there, I think, who do know the trade, but they're few and far between. Do we have enough? Probably not really. If you really, really need to get something done and are prepared to pay whatever it takes to get it done, you can probably find somebody. Age is a factor. I think we're aging out. And so we might be at a kind of a critical crossover point here in terms of replacing those tradesmen who do remember the old techniques. As they move into retirement, we're going to have a shortage, I think. There's not really a curriculum to train new or existing tradespeople, younger tradespeople, in some of those techniques.
I'm thinking about while I'm talking to you about like the building stock approach itself. Like say you said, okay, we have a million of these 1950s bungalows that are this construction. What will it take to maintain them, and sort of break that down into materials and people per house or whatever across the country, and say, okay, wide scale, we're going to need this to preserve these, or just assuming we could try to limit attrition. So yeah, that'd be an interesting approach as well.
First of all, the issue of designated buildings, can we manage them well? No, we can't and we don't. And the reason isn't because of a lack of skilled trades. It's because there's a lack of resources to employ the skilled trades. That's a real serious issue. Does the building stock require infinite number of more skilled trades? Yes. Would people who own heritage houses employ skilled trades if they could find them? Yes, they would. And these would not be designated site owners. You cannot preserve your landscape, your streetscapes, your neighborhoods if your focus is solely on designated buildings. And that will mean empowering owners to make decisions. And that means tax concessions and tax considerations. The Americans have done that, which is why they're so far ahead of us. And the Brits have done it, and that's why they're far ahead of us, both in the number of trades, the variety of trades, and the prestige associated with some of those trades.
All the big companies, they get these guys in there and they've tortured them for the last 30 years, and now they're escaping to the world. And so we need to have places where you could go and interact with somebody who's skilled and who can teach you stuff and show you how to do this. And those people could advocate, I think. And then the trades are a really good example here. You know, if you look at the average age of a skilled tradesman in Alberta, it's like 55 or something like that. So all of those people are people that want to continue doing something. And so they're all potential advocates too, I think.
Yeah, the apprenticeship program is how historically trades came into the business, even more so than classroom learning. But the commitment now to go through, say, a 3 or a 4 year trade and become a journeyman tradesman, it's challenging. Certainly in the regulated trades, such as electricians and plumbers, there's no choice. I mean, that's just the way it is, and they're dealing with modern materials and so on and so forth. But for example, masonry is, you don't have to be a journeyman to actually install some of the products, especially some of the modern adhered products that are questionable whether they're even really masonry in the traditional sense. But certainly if you are looking for a stonemason or somebody to repair an old fireplace, those kind of skill sets are disappearing quite quickly, I'd say. I think that, you know, it should become a specialty within each trade as to a conservation ticket or certificate, something like that, that could be earned and that would then lead to employment. Right now, it's a bit of the Wild West, I guess. It's who you know and whether they have experience, and probably your target audience are not the 18-year-old kid leaving home for the first time and partying hardy in the evenings. It needs probably to be an established trade person who has an interest and who sees it as an opportunity to specialize. And you almost have to target those individuals on a word-of-mouth basis and find them and then draw them in somehow to a program that would train them in that specialty technique.
I think, you know, good example just recently, the Heritage Calgary had their Lion Awards, and they have an award for heritage trades. That's one way of advocating for it. I know the Calgary Heritage Initiative tries to promote heritage trades. I know they've done workshops on it. So I think the first step is raising the awareness and getting people to understand the value of heritage trades. I would say that's the first step. But another way to support getting more people involved in the heritage trades is just talking about it, and talking about it, integrating it into the policy level of the policy work that the City of Calgary does. I know when I authored the Calgary Heritage Strategy, I didn't include a section on heritage trades. They weren't even mentioned, and they should have been. That was a mistake. There was a section on city-owned heritage buildings and the need to set a good example. And so it's implied in all of that. It's implied in the standards and guidelines that you need heritage trades. But we need to be more explicit about it, calling for the need and the requirement for heritage trades.
The government can't take care of all of the buildings. Owners really do want to take care of their buildings, but they need advice and they need the wisdom of the building trades. There's many ways that the current folks in the heritage preservation business are attempting to do that. One is they have a number of government employed advisors. Okay, that's not bad, but they can only reach a limited number of people. Secondly, they hold a lot of workshops, but the workshops, again, generally appeal to the converted. The other is what I consider is marketing, and more marketing, including use of social media. One thing, let's say, an organization like the Civic Trust of the province could do is look in neighborhoods and where the majority of the houses were built before 1940, and then start advocacy campaigns with their neighborhood folks on how you can preserve that building, how you can develop your skill set, who's around that can help you. It's all about the flow of information. So until we figure out what is a heritage trade, how do we encourage the education of heritage trades? How do we regulate heritage trades? How do we make sure that anything relating to heritage, they're encouraged to use a heritage tradesperson? Well, that's where we have to head. It's just going to be very, very difficult to move in that direction. But we have the beginning starting to happen in Alberta, but it's still rather nascent.
It's like go big for conservation. So we can't even go small yet. So it's kind of like maybe pie in the sky, but I think it's so important. Like it's one of the most important things for the planet. And so to be part of heritage conservation to me is like the best, because I feel like I'm doing something really good for the planet.
This is a big challenge. We live in a go-go world, and first cost typically dominates the conversation. The idea of durability is secondary. So there is a cultural obstacle, but I believe there is a minority of the population that does value the old buildings and probably wants to see it done right. At the end of the day, probably the most important thing is going to be the preservation of the materials and trades, so that when those opportunities come along to preserve something, it can be done.